Some women do not grow up. They do not mature. They remain psychologically fixated in a state of eternal youth, charming, light, spontaneous, but deeply fragile. You have seen this, perhaps even in yourself. They are the ones who live as if life were an endless rehearsal for something that never arrives. They jump from experience to experience, never truly diving into anything. Intense relationships, but brief. Grand plans, but never realized. A sparkle in their eyes that hides a silent pain. The fear of growing up. This is called puella eterna, the eternal girl. A powerful archetype, described by Carl Jung as the feminine counterpart of puer eternus, the eternal youth. But it was Marie-Louise von Franz, his closest disciple, who dissected the mechanisms of this pattern with brutal precision. According to her, the woman dominated by this archetype lives in a state of suspension, resisting psychological time, refusing the crossing into maturity. On the outside, she lives off lightness and charm. On the inside, she carries the terror of surrender, responsibility, and commitment to the real. She does not want to grow up, because growing up hurts. Growing up means facing one's own emptiness, making irreversible choices, letting go of fantasies. And the puella prefers to float. She prefers to keep all doors open. She prefers idealization to real encounters. She dreams of perfect love, but flees from intimacy. She wants freedom, but not autonomy. She lives on promises, but fears the weight of realization. Perhaps you are starting to realize that this is not just theory. This is the life of many women. Women who do not understand why they feel so lost, even while being admired. Who do not know why they keep repeating the same mistakes, even while being intelligent. Who collect beginnings, but have no continuity. Who feel a constant emptiness, but do not know where it comes from. Emma Jung, when talking about feminine archetypes, said that a woman needs to integrate the animus, the inner masculine, to achieve a more solid relationship with herself and the world. But the puella refuses this integration. She does not want structure, she wants to soar, and that is exactly why she falls. In this video, I will show you how this archetype acts in the shadows, how it disguises weakness as freedom, how it distances you from who you could become, and more importantly, how to start getting out of this. But I warn you right away, this is not content to comfort you. It is to confront you, because you deserve to be whole, not just charming. If you have the courage to follow through to the end, you may discover that you are still living as a maiden, when you should have already become a queen. The eternal girl is not a phase. It is not a personality trait. She is an archetype, a deep, collective and timeless psychic form that inhabits the feminine unconscious. Carl Jung identified her as a reflection of the puer eternus, the eternal youth who refuses to grow up, to make commitments, to anchor himself in reality. Marie-Louise von Franz was even more incisive in addressing this figure. For her, the puella eterna represents a woman whose soul remains trapped in an idealized, romanticized, sterile youth, and for that reason, blocks her individuation, her maturation, and her real flourishing. She is the woman who lives in the almost loves, almost builds, almost surrenders. She believes her freedom lies in the absence of ties, when in fact, she is merely fleeing from herself. Deep down, she does not want to deal with the limits that life imposes. She has an aversion to routine, boredom, predictability. Everything that refers to the concrete frightens her because it threatens the magical world where she feels safe, a universe where anything can still happen, as long as nothing needs to be sustained. Von Franz accurately describes this pattern in The Problem of the Puer Eternus. The puella is so enchanted with the image of herself as a free spirit that anything requiring real commitment becomes a threat. For her, passion is safe as long as it is platonic. The project is exciting as long as it is abstract. Life is light as long as it is dreamed, but never lived. And the cruelest part of it all? She is often admired. People look at her and see brilliance, creativity, spontaneity. And indeed, these qualities are present, but they are just the surface. What no one sees is the existential void that silently grows behind so much movement. The puella is always too busy to realize she is going in circles. She is a pilgrim of nothingness. But where does this refusal to grow come from? Why do so many modern women identify with this pattern? This is where the crucial point comes in. The puella does not arise from nothing. She is the product of a culture that venerates youth and despises maturity. A culture that tells women that their value lies in being desired, not in being profound. That convinces them that the feminine is synonymous with lightness, not authority. Moreover, the eternal girl is often a psychic response to unresolved traumas. The emotional pain frozen in childhood creates an unconscious resistance to maturation. The wounded woman builds a charming persona to survive. But this mask, over time, becomes a prison. The archetype of the puella is, in this sense, both a symptom and a defense mechanism. Emma Jung, in Animus and Anima, points out that a woman who does not work on her relationship with her own unconscious contents tends to be possessed by them. And the result is exactly that. A life in which the conscious personality is fragile, inconsistent, vulnerable to the archetypal forces that operate beneath the surface. The eternal girl is not in control of her own life. She is being lived by an image she does not even realize she carries. Now perhaps everything begins to make sense. Your restlessness, the repetitions, the feeling that you never truly feel whole, even when it seems you have everything. This is the effect of the puella. She does not want you to grow. Because growing requires losing the illusion, and that is the most expensive currency of the psyche. But then, an essential question arises. If this is the maiden that dominates so many lives, where is the rest of the feminine? Where is the path to something more whole, deeper, more true? This is what we will talk about now, because within you, beyond the girl, there is a sleeping queen, and perhaps it is time to wake her up. If this content is making sense to you, click the subscribe button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support. Within every woman, there are psychic forces that operate far beyond conscious will. Jung called these forces archetypes, primordial, universal images that shape our most intimate experiences. In the case of the feminine psyche, two of these archetypes stand out particularly intensely: the maiden and the great mother. Understanding the tension between these two figures is essential to recognize why so many women remain trapped in the illusion of eternal youth, even when everything around them is already crying out for transformation. The maiden is the image of purity, beauty, and freshness. She represents potential, openness to the new, the hope for something grand that is yet to come. She is the one who enchants, who seduces, who dreams. She is light, solar, inspiring. In youth, this archetype is vital. It drives the desire to explore the world, to experience, to seek something beyond known limits. But the problem begins when this image remains dominant in adulthood. When the maiden does not make space for other aspects of the psyche to manifest, she becomes an obstacle. She prevents the woman from maturing, from establishing herself in the world, from taking responsibility for her own destiny. The woman continues to see herself as potential, but never allows herself to be realization. She remains in the eternal almost. Almost knows what she wants, almost surrenders, almost finds herself. And this almost becomes a black hole, an emotional vortex that sucks away vitality, purpose, and meaning. Marie-Louise von Franz writes that the maiden who refuses to die symbolically cannot be reborn as a whole woman. And here we are not talking about physical death, but the symbolic death of the childish ego, that part of us that insists on living in fantasy, that seeks to be saved, that rejects the weight of reality. This death is painful, yes, but absolutely necessary, because only from it can the Great Mother, the archetype of maturity, nourishment, and wisdom, emerge. The Great Mother is not the nice, domesticated woman who cared for everyone and forgot about herself. No, she is the queen of her own inner world. She commands, nurtures, sustains, and transforms. Unlike the maiden, who waits to be chosen, the Great Mother chooses. Unlike the maiden, who wants to be admired, the Great Mother demands respect. She does not need to be charming because she is whole. She is the one with deep roots, who knows when to give, when to protect, when to withdraw. The woman who embodies this archetype stops asking for permission to exist. She simply exists, with presence, depth, and direction. But few reach that point. Because the path requires sacrifice, the maiden must die for the queen to be born. And this is a passage that the Puella Eterna does not want to make. She clings to the mirror of youth, to the promises of idealized love, to the illusion that time does not pass. But time passes. And when a woman refuses the call of maturity, she begins to wither inside. The archetype of the maiden, which was a source of brilliance, becomes a gilded cage. Carl Jung, when speaking about feminine individuation, points out that a woman only becomes complete when she integrates what is hidden within her, not just the seductive image she shows to the world, but also her creative, destructive, and regenerative powers. The woman who lives only in the domain of the maiden is fragmented. She is half. And as long as she is half, she will be dependent, unstable, and vulnerable. Do you feel that there is something more in you, something stronger, deeper, more true? You are right. That something is your inner queen, waiting for the moment when you will stop fleeing and start to reign. But before that, we need to look honestly at the places where the Puella sabotages her life, where she undermines her relationships, her career, her decisions. Because if you do not see where the eternal girl is operating, she will continue to be in charge without you realizing it. And that is exactly what we will explore next, where the Puella acts, how she sabotages, and what she is trying to avoid at all costs. The Puella Eterna is seductive. She has something charming, almost magical. She is creative, impulsive, spontaneous. She is always full of new ideas, overwhelming passions, and grand plans. But this energy cannot sustain the weight of the real world. She shines brightly, and then disappears. Because deep down, she doesn't want to sustain anything. She wants to feel, dream, experience, but not to stay. In relationships, this is devastating. The Puella wants love, but she doesn't want commitment. She idealizes the perfect partner, the sublime connection, the absolute fusion. But the moment the other shows themselves to be human, flawed, real, she pulls away. She starts saying that it's not like it used to be, that something has changed, that the magic is gone. The truth is that the magic never existed. It was projection. She projected onto the other what she has not yet found within herself: stability, depth, emotional structure. Marie-Louise von Franz, in The Problem of the Puer Aeternus, describes the woman who, dominated by this archetype, lives in search of a savior, someone to pull her out of her internal confusion, to bring meaning to her existence. But when that man appears, she demands so much from him that no one can sustain. And frustrated, she returns to her cycle of idealization and rejection. This oscillation is typical of the Puella. She wants the ecstasy of the encounter, but she doesn't want the work of the bond. Because every bond requires renunciation, confrontation, frustration, and she is not willing to deal with that. In her career, sabotage follows the same pattern. The puella is always seeking something that makes sense, something that matches her essence. She has difficulty accepting routine, discipline, continued effort. Everything that requires consistency suffocates her. So she starts projects with enthusiasm but abandons them at the first sign of boredom. She changes fields, courses, jobs, always thinking that she hasn't found her true mission yet. She says she is demanding, that she seeks authenticity. But often, she is just fleeing from the inevitable pain that every real path requires. Carl Jung, in Animus and Anima, warns of this type of woman whose animus, the rational and structuring function of the unconscious, is still immature. This manifests in inflated speech, full of grand ideas, but with little concrete achievement. The woman dominated by the puella talks a lot about herself, her gifts, her unique vision of the world, but cannot root this in something tangible, because the animus has not yet been confronted or worked through. It remains as a seductive but empty discourse, and the woman continues adrift. And there are also the choices, or rather, the refusal to choose. The puella is terrified of definitive decisions, because choosing something means giving up other possibilities. It means closing cycles, leaving parts of herself behind. And this is unbearable for her. Therefore, she lives in the eternal maybe. Maybe she wants this. Maybe she will follow that. Maybe she will return. Maybe she will change again. This maybe keeps her in a suspended state where nothing truly flourishes because nothing has truly been planted. What this woman has not yet understood is that maturing is not losing freedom. It is conquering it. Freedom is not being able to escape everything. It is being able to stay, to be able to build, to be able to sustain one's own existence with dignity. But behind all this instability, there is something deeper, something that often the woman herself cannot name. A hidden pain, a psychic wound, an existential void that the puella tries to mask with movement, with romances, with new ideas. And it is this secret pain that we need to illuminate now. Because the puella is not just a behavioral pattern. She's a symptom of something much more intimate, a soul that feels alone, lost, and too scared to embrace her wholeness. In the next part, we will dive into the shadow of the eternal girl and reveal the silent pain she tries to hide behind her enchantment. The puella eterna enchants. She lights up the places she passes through with her lightness, her spontaneity, her almost mystical aura of eternal youth. She is sweet, delicate, sensitive, and yet deeply restless. She carries in her gaze a mix of hope and emptiness. Because behind all that shine, there is a pain that almost no one sees, and that many times she herself cannot name. This woman lives dominated by a fantasy. The fantasy that if she is good enough, beautiful enough, and lovely enough, she will be loved, protected, and guided by someone stronger. The charming prince who will come to place her in the spot where she can finally live happily ever after. She does not consciously acknowledge this, of course, but her behaviors betray her. The constant passivity, the chronic indecision, the need to please everyone, the paralyzing fear of displeasing, the insatiable quest for external approval. The puella is the woman who speaks sweetly, who hesitates to make decisions alone, who prefers to wait for others to do, say, or resolve. She wants to be guided. She wants to be desired. She wants to be saved. And when the supposed savior appears, a real man, with his flaws, contradictions, and limitations, she is deeply disappointed, because reality never matches the ideal. And she, who projected all the resolution of her own existence onto him, feels betrayed, misunderstood, abandoned. Thus begins the cycle of escape, rejection, and new idealization. Marie-Louise von Franz describes this behavior with an almost painful clarity. The Puella lives in an emotional childlike state, still waiting for someone or something to come and fill her inner void. But since this filling never comes from the outside, because it cannot come, she fragments slowly. The fantasy that was once her refuge begins to turn into a prison. And what once protected her from the world, now isolates her from it. Often, this archetype develops narcissistic traits. The Puella becomes obsessed with herself, with her image, her reflection, her appearance. She revolves around the mirror, real or symbolic, and expects the world to validate her all the time. The other exists only as an audience, an external mirror that must reflect her beauty, her grace, her sensitivity. And when the other fails to fulfill this role, she reacts with anger, contempt, or emotional coldness. This self-absorption prevents her from seeing the suffering of others. Empathy is superficial, strategic. She knows how to appear sensitive, but deep down, her attention is always focused on her own inner drama. A drama that she amplifies in thoughts, gestures, and words as if she were living an eternal romantic play. The Puella is both the actress and the spectator of her own life. And on this stage, the plot is always the same. She waits, she enchants, she is disappointed, she suffers, but she never changes. And there is one theme that terrifies her deeply: time. The idea of aging is unbearable, because the archetype of the eternal girl is closely linked to physical youth, fresh beauty, and the enchantment that only novelty brings. When the years begin to pass and the marks of time appear in the mirror, she enters a crisis. The fantasy begins to crumble, and with it, the identity she has built also collapses. She tries to resist. She invests in appearance, in performative affection, in emotional distractions. But nothing stops the approaching psychic collapse, because the problem was never time. It was the fact that she never built a solid, mature, real internal foundation. Without this structure, the passage of time becomes an existential threat, and many, unfortunately, succumb. There are cases where this radical refusal to mature leads to more severe psychological states. The Puella begins to disconnect from reality. She enters increasingly closed, more unreal internal worlds. Fantasies replace bonds, desires replace actions, real life becomes unbearable. And the charming woman of yesterday, who seemed merely dreamy, transforms into a reclusive, isolated figure, trapped in a subtle form of psychosis, where there is no longer any exchange with the world, only echo. And perhaps this is the most painful point of all. This woman is not bad. She is lost. She created this world of fantasy to protect herself. But now she drags these internal shackles through life, projecting them onto others, repeating cycles, and sickening her own soul. Not because she wants to, but because she doesn't know another way to exist. But there is another path. A path where the woman stops living as a fairy tale character and begins to live as the author of her own story. But to walk this path, she needs to do something that the archetype of the Puella will never allow. She needs to choose to grow. And it is about this growth, real, deep, painful, but liberating, that we will talk about next. Because there is a way out, but it requires you to cross the mirror. If what you're hearing resonates with you, you'll find real value in my ebook, Beyond the Shadow. It breaks down Jung's core ideas and gives you tools to understand yourself more deeply. Link is in the pinned comment. Breaking away from the archetype of the Puella Eterna is not simple, and it is definitely not painless. It is, in fact, a brutal crossing. because it requires a direct confrontation with what this woman fears most: change. Not superficial change in appearance or environment, but true inner transformation, the kind that demands surrender, that requires symbolic death, that demands she abandon the fragile and charming girl she built to survive, and finally become a woman. This transformation does not happen by chance. It begins the moment the woman realizes that the cycle repeats, that the same patterns keep emerging: shallow relationships, postponed decisions, abandoned dreams, a chronic sense of emptiness and inadequacy. Reality knocks at the door. Time makes itself felt. And for the first time, perhaps, she faces the mirror without the veil of fantasy. It is at this point that the path of individuation, proposed by Carl Jung, reveals itself. Individuation is the process of becoming who you truly are. Not a persona constructed to be loved or accepted, but an integrated, conscious, living psyche. For this, the woman needs to stop fleeing from herself. She needs to stop chasing promises and new beginnings. She needs to commit to the process of maturity, even if it hurts. And it will hurt, because growing up requires renouncing the comfort of psychic childhood. And here comes the most delicate point: the relationship with time. The Puella is terrified of aging because she associates youth with freedom, beauty, worth. But this is an illusion created by a culture that idolizes appearance and ignores depth. Aging is not the end of freedom. On the contrary, it is the beginning of true freedom, because only when the woman stops seeking external approval, performing enchantment, depending on others' gazes, does she begin to live authentically. Aging, in this sense, is maturing. And maturing is learning to choose, to sustain, to remain. It is moving from maybe to yes. It is stopping waiting for someone to solve her life and starting to take charge of her own psyche. It is abandoning the victim discourse and positioning herself as the author. It is understanding that being a woman is not being light and ethereal. It is being whole. Marie-Louise von France states that the true healing of the archetype of the puer or the puella begins when the individual commits to something greater than their own fantasies. It can be a job, a creation, a true relationship, a spiritual quest. It doesn't matter. What matters is the commitment, that word so feared by the eternal girl. Committing is planting your feet on the ground and saying, "I am here. I choose to be here, and I accept the consequences of that." This commitment requires a pause in constant movement. The woman needs to stop fleeing. She needs to observe her patterns with radical honesty, reflect, silence. Ask herself, how long will I live adrift? How long will I hand my life over to the invisible hands of chance, others, luck? She needs to take command. This does not mean hardening, losing sensitivity, or killing the maiden within. It means integrating her, making space for the wise, firm, and mature part of the psyche. It means becoming a subject, no longer an object of others' desire. It means accepting that growing up is not about ceasing to be enchanting. It is about ceasing to be dependent. And here lies the great paradox. When the woman stops chasing idealized love, constant approval, the perfect life, is when she begins to be truly loved, because she finally shows herself as she is, without masks, without performance, with presence, with truth. But the journey does not end here, because now that the puella begins to awaken to reality, she needs to find a new center of identity, a new internal place from which to live. And this leads us to the next and final part, the crossing of individuation, the birth of the whole, conscious, rooted woman. Life demands. It always demands. And for the woman dominated by the puella eterna, this demand does not come from the outside. It comes from within. At some point, even with all the effort to maintain lightness, charm, and the appearance of freedom, something begins to crumble behind the facade. Emptiness settles in. Anguish intensifies. And a question begins to echo. How long will I continue to run away from myself? There comes a time when the archetype of the eternal girl no longer serves. It no longer protects. It no longer enchants. It suffocates. It imprisons. It prevents you from becoming who you truly are. Because what it wants is to keep you still, enchanted by promises, waiting for the right moment, the right man, the perfect opportunity. That never comes. And it won't come, because reality demands attitude, presence, responsibility. Reality demands maturity. The process of individuation, this path of integration of the psyche that Jung described, begins right here, when you choose to stop waiting. When you understand that maturing is not the end of beauty, but the beginning of depth. That it is not the end of love, but the start of real connections. That it is not the end of freedom, but the birth of autonomy. Breaking away from the puella is an act of courage. It is letting go of an identity that has served you for a long time, but now limits you. It is crossing the desert of doubt, fear, and loneliness to find a deeper truth about yourself. It is looking into the eyes of the woman you could be and saying yes. The woman who emerges from this process is not perfect. She does not enchant everyone. She does not live on promises, but she is whole. She is the one who leads her life. She is the one who knows herself, who supports herself, who commits to her own journey. And this woman, unlike the maiden, no longer waits for a happy ending. She creates her own story, with clarity, with courage, with truth. Now, stop and look honestly at your life. Are you, or someone you know, living as the protagonist, or as an extra in your own destiny? Have you witnessed the presence of an eternal girl who is still waiting for someone to come and save her? Or is she ready to save herself? If something here touched you, bothered you, or made you see a pattern that you or someone you know carries, comment. Tell me what you noticed. Sometimes, putting it into words is the first step to transforming an idea into reality. And if you felt that this video spoke to something deep about someone close or something within you, don't stop here. Keep watching the next video. It is important, because the path of awareness does not end in a revelation. It continues in every choice you make from it.